This story was told to me by a close friend of mine named Rebecca, shortly after our 4th year of college. Rebecca was a very hard-working student who took her education very seriously, with aspirations for medical school. Paired with the fact that we both attended one of the top schools in the country, school life was difficult at best and downright hellish at worst. All this said, Rebecca also had a condition called achromatopsia which impacted her vision severely, making it painful for her to see in brightly lit classrooms, diminished her eyesight to only within a few feet away, and left her with complete color blindness. Despite all of this, she was a stellar student, averaging an almost 4.0 GPA due to her amazing attitude and insane work ethic. In general, professors at our school were very accommodating, as our school has an accessibility mandate they were legally required to enforce, ensuring that students with varying disabilities were adequately accommodated. Failing to do so can result in legal action against the school if the student can provide evidence that their accommodations have been denied. Now in our second last semester, Rebecca had 5 courses left, 4 of which were bird courses, but the 5th being known to be exceedingly difficult, vertebrate endocrinology I think. Needless to say, she took the course as it was a prerequisite for her specialization. All was well until she showed up to the first lecture. In previous years, the class was taught by our fantastic department head who'd retired as of that year. Instead, this year's class was taught by a young 30-something associate professor. Associate professor went through their spiel and let the class off early, after which Rebecca went up to give her accommodations, which consisted of printed lecture slides in size 30-point font, high contrast diagrams for viewing, and an audio recording of the lecture, which she has her own personal recorder for. All other professors had no problems with this, and were always willing to accommodate. Associate professor however had an ego of sorts, believing that the research they were working on was something of cutting edge in their field, and denied Rebecca's accommodation certificate, stating that providing copies of the lecture to her could open her research to academic theft. She pressed and told her flat out there was no risk of that as she would sign an NDA or anything if needed, but the associate professor doubled down and told her no. Rebecca thought maybe the associate professor was unaware of how this worked, so she left and came back during office hours with a copy of the accessibility guidelines and her accessibility certificate to show them that she was legally entitled to her requests. Now, important to note, Rebecca is very smart and has dealt with crap like this before in both her personal life and work life. So right before she arrived, she hit the little record button on her device she uses for note taking to ensure if there was further disagreement, she had more evidence than he said she said. Her intuition was spot on, as the professor lost her crap and told her that unlike you, I can and have read the guidelines, and went on to tell her if in 4th year, if she couldn't keep up with the material without requiring special exceptions, she didn't belong in her class or at this prestigious institution. Rebecca held her composure and informed them again of the accommodations she was requesting, her ability to sign an NDA if she so chose, and that if they had read the guidelines, they'd understand that what they are doing is illegal and could leave the college at legal liability. The associate professor sputtered, "If you threaten me again, I'll have you expelled from this school." So Rebecca apologized and left straight to the accessibility office to lodge a complaint. She sat down with her counselor and recounted what had transpired over her 2 meetings with the associate professor and played the recording for her advisor. She also mentioned that the events had caused her severe duress and she was considering legal action against the school if immediate action was not implemented to remove the barriers to her equitable education. The counselor immediately brought this up to the dean, who brought this to the vice provost, who assembled a tribunal and informed the associate professor they had received a complaint by a student regarding discrimination within the classroom. Tribunal took place at the end of the week, with the dean, professor's new department head, vice provost chair, and other members at large representing the panel. Rebecca was sitting in the room during the hearing, quietly while the associate professor went up to the chair. Associate professor immediately started to lie and tried to spin it that Rebecca was asking for sample midterms and finals because she was struggling with the first week's content. Needless to say, the panel didn't even call Rebecca up to testify. Instead, they played out the recording Rebecca had taken, and after finishing, the associate professor had nothing Then they screamed that the evidence was illegal as they had not been given prior consent before the recording had occurred. The chair told them that 1. If you had read the law, you'd know that is not how it works here, and 2. If that is your only defense, the college is firing you for malicious breach of contract, openly admitting to leaving the college open to a human rights lawsuit, and abusing their position of authority to bully and intimidate a student. Given our school's reputation, getting fired is lethal to a budding researcher's future career. Associate professor screamed and started swearing at the panel, Rebecca, and anyone else in the room before security escorted her to her office. That was the last time she was allowed in the office of this college, or any other as far as I'm aware. As for Rebecca, well, since the class had just lost their professor, they'd gotten one of the more senior professors to take on the class for the rest of the semester, and Rebecca did swimmingly. As of date, she's finishing her residency as a dermatologist, and I could not be more proud of her. Backstory: I used to work at a marina when I was in high school that sold gas and allowed people to dock for free if they wanted to. Now one day a guy comes in on a pretty big boat, comes in and gets a lot of gas, like $400 worth of gas. He comes to the counter to pay and gives me $400 in $100 bills, and I accept them, and he goes on his merry way. Fast forward a week or so, and I'm told by my boss that the bills he paid in were all counterfeit bills. Unfortunately, as he paid in cash, we had no way of tracking him down, so we think that he just got away with stealing $400 worth of gas. That is until this idiot comes back after about a month and a half, thinking he got away with stealing the gas. When he comes back in, I recognize the guy and tell my coworker to call the police right away. However, I knew that this guy would just leave if I let on that I had recognized him, and we had discovered his plot to get free gas, so I decide to pretend I don't recognize him. Luckily for me, this guy asks to dock the boat for an hour or so on our dock, and I tell it's not a problem. Now it is policy to get the name and phone number of customers using free dockage, as well as asking that they leave their keys in the boat so that we can move the boat to a different dock if needed. He complies to all of the rules and leaves his boat, and he leaves his keys with me. After probably about 15 minutes of waiting, the police show up on the dock and ask my boss where the guy is. My boss tells them he just left his boat, but we have his number and can get him to come back to the boat, and he then instructs me to do just that. At this point I was pissed at this dude for making me look dumb for basically losing $400, so I call and tell him, "Hey, this is me from Marina. It seems as though there is an issue with your engine, and it seems to be smoking. For those that don't know boats that well, engines are very expensive, and this one in particular was a 350 horsepower Yamaha engine, which is top of the line, so that man got back to that boat in record time. When he got back to the boat, the look on his face when he saw two cops waiting for him was priceless. He tried to play it off and act like he had done nothing wrong, and he didn't know why the police were there, but that was short-lived as they arrested him and told him why he was being arrested. Turns out the guy had almost $2 grand in counterfeit $100 bills on him. This was many years ago when I was around 5. 23 years ago, so it's more about my father instead. This does contain some mild vandalism, so here is hoping it doesn't get removed. My house was on a lower class side of town, mostly of more poor folks and retirees who had lived there before it went downhill. Our backyard butted right up against an alleyway that was a constant source of problems. As an example, we had a 15-foot diameter trampoline stolen from our backyard. This thing had been rusted together, so I can only figure they popped it up on its side and rolled it away like a big tire. Anyways, back to the story. The house across the alley from us was a duplex kind of a thing, and the landlord would rent to literally anyone. One guy he rented to was a fairly prolific drug dealer who ran his gig literally out of his kitchen window. Cars would pull up through the alley into the yard parking. Hands would move back and forth, then the car would drive away. This guy legit had a drug drive-through. It didn't take long for my parents to find all kinds of undesirable trash migrating its way into our yard. Needles, burned spoons, broken pipes, condoms, and who knows what else. My parents were worried about my dumb 5-year-old but getting into something or stabbing myself with something that could decidedly harm me. My mother was a nurse before being disabled in a severe car accident and had been infected with hepatitis C while working at the hospital due to a needle that had been missed, so she was super worried about this for me as well as a handful of other kids in the neighborhood. Conversations with the landlord, including gathered evidence, made no difference. He didn't live there. Why did he care? Eventually my parents tried to call the cops. The local PD was not helpful. They said they couldn't investigate or even send out a car on someone's word. This wasn't our first problem with the local cops either. After having our cars and other things broken into or stolen, they told my parents to write down license plate numbers, and if any matches a known felon or someone with a warrant, they would investigate. So my mother sat at the window for a full day and wrote down every plate she could see, hiding carefully the whole time. She ended the day with over 100 plates. That's how busy this guy was. We faxed, remember, 90s, the numbers along with a letter explaining what the numbers were for and who we had spoken with to the PD. Nothing happened. After several weeks they called back and were told there were no matches of any kind. After another week of the problem simply getting worse, my father decides to take matters into his own hands. One night with no moon, he sneaks into the driveway and throws roofing nails he had bought the previous day all over into their area. Hundreds of them. We watched for weeks as seemingly every tweaker in town would stop and almost immediately have to fix flats. Evidently, either business dwindled so much or the renter figured out someone was messing with them, both, that they finally moved. The landlord spent over 2 weeks of having cleaning crews and the like over, throwing out huge mounds of garbage and repair crews to fix damage that I later found out was caused by the renter. It seems they trashed and stripped the place before disappearing some night without us noticing. The moral here? Not really one exactly, except for maybe the landlord. Be more selective who you let live in your house maybe. Thank you for watching. Slap that like button and comment your opinion on these stories below. I'm waiting. Write that comment. Seriously. Have you written it yet? If you don't comment, you make a bunny cry somewhere. You're not that kind of person, I know. Anyways, peace out and catch you tomorrow.